I'm trying out these new contact lenses and yeah, they're hella dry. Like, I can't really see, but I'm loving the way they look, so that's a bonus. Who needs to see anyway? Not me. Hi guys, my name is Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back for episode 19 of Killer Weekend, where each week we'll discuss a true crime case and you guys can leave your thoughts in the comment box below. I'm actually noticing these earrings are like wobbling quite a bit, so if they disappear halfway through the show, that's why. I will make a disclaimer, a big disclaimer, because this week's episode is a rough and tough one. So I'll just say, this week's episode will involve details of violent and sexual crime against a child. If that's a trigger point for you, please do turn away now. It's not for you. Another one maybe. Next week, I'll see you there. And in the promise I can talk. I don't know what's wrong. Please don't switch off. It will get better. I just want to say a massive thank you to all of you guys there who have subscribed to my channel. Honestly, it makes me feel amazing seeing those little subscribers go up and all your lovely messages. I can't believe people actually voluntarily watch me. Are you sure a gun not been held to your head? Are you sure? But honestly guys, it means the world, and if you like true crime and anything horror or creepy or spooky or supernatural, just please hit that subscribe button. I promise I don't do that every week. And also feel free to follow me on my Instagram page so you can get a wee bit of an insight into what I'll be up to at Megan True Crime. I also have a personal vlog channel which is Megan T, and you'll find the link for that in the description box below as well. As you know, I'm here for you guys every single Friday, apart from last Friday because we had dishwasher gate. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll understand what that means. I was literally crying on my kitchen floor for about 4 hours trying to stop the dishwasher from exploding bubbles. It was very fun. What I did was actually put a wee bit of dishwasher liquid, like washing up liquid, fairy liquid to be exact. Don't put that in your dishwasher, and if you do, it's meant to be just a smidge. I went really crazy. I was like going ham, like pouring it everywhere, and then there was bubbles all over my kitchen. So luckily I'm still alive to tell the tale. I did not drown in the foam party that was my house. And yeah, if you ever want to get rid of it, just put a little bit of salt on it. Put a little bit of salt takes all the bubbles down, and then just put it on a fresh cycle and hope for the best. So how's everyone's week been? Mine has been actually quite okay. I'm not gonna lie, I'm actually thriving. Just kidding. Lockdown's almost over though here in the UK, so that is so exciting. Fingers crossed we can get out and go for a dinner. Like, do we even remember what it's like to go for dinner anymore? I know all you guys over in America probably do, but we here have been locked in our houses for months now, since Christmas actually before Christmas. So the thought of going out and having a meal, having a cocktail is just amazing. So I cannot wait. Roll on the 26th. I just hit myself in the face and we'll get started. This isn't going well. So to get into the true crime zone that we are going to be in tonight, like I said, it's a brutal case. It's a really famous UK case, and it was one of those ones, when I was thinking about doing this week's episode, I actually had a different episode in mind, and then I was like, meh, you know, you just, some weeks you're not really feeling certain cases, and I was thinking, what kind of case could I do? And I started to think back where it all started with my true crime obsession, and I started thinking about Crimewatch. Now, for those of you who do not know or who are too young to know, Crimewatch was a television programme that started on the BBC, I believe. BBC? Yes. And it started back in 1984 when we literally had 5 channels. I know it seems wild now, but we only had 5 channels. So this was our true crime fix, and my nana was obsessed with anything to do with true crime. Must be where I get it from. But she got me onto Crimewatch, where hosts Nick Ross and Jill Dando, who tragically actually was murdered herself. The irony in that is so sad. And Nick Ross would talk through different crimes and appeal to the public for information. So it was kind of like a tips line for the UK, and he would say who the criminal looked like, where it happened, and if anyone knew this person, would they call into the show, and it would go through to like a tips line. It was amazing. I absolutely loved Crimewatch, and there's so many crimes that were actually solved due to Crimewatch here in the UK. And the guy Nick Ross, who presented Crimewatch, used to end every episode with "and don't have nightmares," which I just love. He was just he was just a spicy bitch and I was there for it. It brings back such an era of nostalgia for the UK. I remember coming in from school and getting my dinner and then just settling on the sofa with like an umbongo and my Game Boy, and there it would be, Crimewatch. It was like the only form of entertainment on a Thursday night. What can I say, guys? The 90s were pretty slow. So me being the nostalgic person that I am, I started watching old episodes. You can get them on YouTube actually, and I started watching old episodes of Crimewatch when I came across one that made me shudder. It is such a famous UK case and it never really leaves anyone, especially mothers here in the UK who've heard about the case, never quite leaves their minds. It was one of those cases that went against everything that everyone thinks about how innocent children are. It's a case that I've mentioned in passing previously on another episode, and it was one that I definitely wanted to dive into. It raises the age-old question, are some people just born evil? This week, everyone, we will discuss the disturbing case of James Bulger. James Patrick Bulger was born on the 16th of March 1990 in Kirby, Merseyside in England. He was the first child to his mother and father, Denise and Ralph Bulger. Denise and Ralph both grew up in kind of honest, hard-working, working class backgrounds. Denise herself was actually one of 13 kids, so it was a really busy house. She said there was a lot of fighting in the house, a lot of arguing, but there was also a lot of love that came from being within such a big family. Denise herself from a young age left school and decided she wasn't really going to be a career woman. That wasn't really her focus in life. Growing up with a big family had made her really interested in becoming a mother herself, and she always felt like becoming a mum would be her calling in life. She actually worked in an ice cream factory prior to meeting Ralph, which is the best job. I can't imagine anything better, only if it's mint choc chip or Mackey's vanilla ice cream. If you've not tried Mackey's vanilla ice cream, go out to the shop and buy it after this because it's amazing. Ralph Bulger, James's dad and Denise's future husband, was pretty much the same. He was really hard working. He even says it himself, he's not the brightest guy in the world, but he's a hard worker and he is dedicated to his family. So he actually earned his money doing kind of odd jobs here and there, and then eventually became a security guard when he met Denise and she was 18. The two had an instant connection. They were really into each other and it was kind of a case of young love, and everything moved pretty fast. The two actually moved into a bed sit in the UK, which is like kind of like a flat share. So you would own or rent your own bedroom within this flat share, and then you would share a bathroom or like a kitchen or a living room, sometimes all three, with other people. I think they are still quite popular in London because it's just cheaper to rent a room rather than rent a whole apartment, especially in London where it's pretty pricey. So this is what the couple did because they, weren't making big mega bucks. So they decided to move into a little bed sit so they could move out of their home and be together. Only 2 years after the couple met and settled down, they actually fell pregnant, and Denise felt like this was the start of her journey in life. But sadly, that was cut extremely short when Denise found out at full term pregnancy that she would no longer be able to have her baby healthily. The baby had no heartbeat, and therefore Denise had to actually give birth, a stillbirth, to her baby daughter who didn't sadly make it. One of the most bone-chilling things about this case, I would say, is the words that Denise said to herself after she lost her first child, which was, "This is the worst day of your life. Things can never get any worse than this." And sadly, Denise was very wrong. 2 years after their lost child, Denise and Ralph actually fell pregnant again. Denise was 22 and she said that she was so careful during this pregnancy. She was so terrified that something bad would happen again, even though it was not her fault the first time that anything went wrong. And luckily, then she was blessed in the March with her beautiful baby boy, James Bulger. Ralph was said to be so chuffed as well. He had his little lad. He wanted him to play football football with them and just get into sports. He was a real man's man, and he was just buzzing for this chance to be a dad to James. His mum was said to be so overprotective of James because obviously of what had happened with her previous pregnancy. She just worshipped this little boy. He went everywhere with Denise. She said he was so happy. He was always dancing and laughing. She said he was never walking, always running, which I think can be said of most toddlers. Like my little nephew, the minute he was up on his feet, he was darting around the living room, and still to this day no one can actually catch him. And Denise would later say that he was always dancing to Michael Jackson, and he just wanted cuddles. He was just the cutest little boy. He had such a cheeky little grin, and you can just see that in him, that he just has this little kind of mischievous look, but he's just got an absolute heart of gold. He's got these big massive eyes, and yeah, you could just eat him up, couldn't you? He's just the cutest little thing. Over Christmas and New Year, Denise snaps so many photos of her gorgeous pride and joy, and she's just so happy when she's looking back at these photos of her little boy. But little did she know that the face of her young child would be etched in the memories of everyone in the UK for years to come. The day of Friday the 12th of February 1993 started off pretty kind of regular for Denise. She was kind of busy in the morning, getting James ready and saying goodbye to her husband as he popped off to work. And then what she was planning on doing was then heading to a butcher's in a local shopping centre called the Strand. This was in a place called Bootle. Hope I'm saying it right. If I'm not, guys from Merseyside, please don't murder me. But yeah, so she was heading off to this shopping centre called the Strand, and she was going to head to the butcher's. So she arrived in the shopping centre, did a wee bit of clothes shopping, just popping around, and James was said to be extra kind of rambunctious this day, so much so that she didn't want to fuss and put him in the pram, because you know, toddlers, they kick off the minute you try and put them in their pram. So yeah, it's easier sometimes just to have them walking alongside you, maybe with some reins or holding their hand, or even carrying them if you've got the arm strength for that. But Denise decided on this day that she was just going to lead her son through the shopping centre by holding his hand. Now, she said that at first he was kind of kicking off and stuff like that, but he eventually calmed down when she went into a shop and got him a sweetie. Like most kids, that chilled him right out, and then they headed to A.R. Tim's butcher, where Denise had already placed an order for that day. Denise walked into the butcher and she was holding James's hand. The butcher was chatting away to her, and then she let go of James's hand for 2 seconds to hand cash to the man behind the register. He gave Denise her bag of her goods, and she turned around and James was gone. Denise at this point was frantic. She went outside the butcher shop, she was looking everywhere, she was asking people if they'd seen a small boy, no one said they had, and she was then in an absolute frantic panic. She was running up and down the shopping centre, grabbing people, trying to get staff to help her, and unfortunately no one had seen James or where he'd gone. Now you can only imagine, especially from what she's been through in her life, this is every parent's worst nightmare, and probably we've all done it as children. We all wandered off in the Tesco's or the Sainsbury's or Walmart or whatever, and our mums have been so stressed that they will not find us again. But more often than not, you know, we find our mums and we're all safe and sound. So Denise was hopeful that he would come back to her, or that he'd be found, he'd just wandered into some other shop. So the police do get called eventually. I think it's about 15 minutes until Denise realises that she can't do this on her own and she's got to call the police. The police arrive at the Strand and start searching shops, start asking businesses for their CCTV so that they can try and track down where James went and if he went with someone or went alone. Sorry gang, that's my dog barking. When police searched the surrounding areas, they found absolutely nothing. However, one of the CCTV cameras in the Strand actually picked up James walking from the butcher holding the hand of a young boy. He looked to be about kind of 12, 13. He looked quite young, and there was another young boy in front that they were kind of gesturing to as well. So it just seemed that perhaps James had wandered off, gotten lost, and these little boys were helping him find his way, and perhaps went to find a kind of security guard or a police officer so that James could be reunited with whoever he came with that day. The police then showed this to Denise and Ralph actually said to Denise at the time he felt an instant sense of relief, because he thought, right, He's with 2 young kids. He's fine. He'll be found. Everything's fine. We know he's safe. And sadly, Ralph could not be more wrong about the 2 people that led his son away. On the 14th of February, Valentine's Day 1993, Denise actually attended a press conference held by the local police in order to plead with who had ever taken him or plead with someone to give him back. Sadly, Denise's pleas would fall on deaf ears, and she would later find out that day that 2 young schoolboys had discovered the dismembered body of 2-year-old James Bulger on a local railway track. At first, this horrific crime seemed like it could have actually been a tragic railway accident because, like I said, James's body was dismembered. However, this hadn't actually been done by a human. It had been done by an oncoming train that had passed through the tracks where James had been lying across. But when he received an autopsy, the pathologist realised that this had not been his main cause of death. James was already dead when he was struck by the train. He'd been killed by one of the several fractures that appeared on his skull. He also had several other injuries such as beatings to his ribs, to his face, to his neck. Also, he had a cut on his face from an impact where he had fell. He had paint poured in his eye, some sort of blue paint. And as if this wasn't horrific enough, on a 2-year-old baby, there were signs of sexual assault on James's back end and on his lower region. And I'm not going to get into it because he's a baby. Like I said, if you want to Google that, you really can't forget these things, so just tread with caution. This seemed like a savage attack, and he was also found with batteries in his mouth. I don't know. Upon the discovery of this horrific crime and the things that had been done to her son, Denise was absolutely heartbroken. She was gone. She was devastated, and so was his dad, Ralph Bulger. Ralph actually said in an interview that he blamed Denise heavily for letting go of James's hand. Why couldn't she have just kept his hand? Why couldn't she have kept her eye on him? He felt like she had failed James as a mother, and he really took this out on Denise, and Denise couldn't handle that and therefore turned to drinking heavily. She actually even went to stay with her mum for a little while because she could not, one, stand the guilt that Ralph was making her feel, and then 2, she couldn't stand being around all of James's things in his house, in their bedroom. It was just absolutely devastating for the family, and it really ripped them apart. Police couldn't believe that someone could do this. They absolutely violated this baby, and they just wanted this person behind bars where they belonged, and they had to find out who did this on little evidence. It was 1993, like I said, the CCTV footage they found was majorly grainy, but this was all police kind of had, apart from a couple of witness testimonies from the Strand shopping centre that day. So police jumped into action and hired a computer tech expert that could enhance the video and make it at least usable for a public appeal. They also reached out to a criminal profiler and psychologist to try and find out what kind of person could have done this to baby James. When they finally received back the enhanced video, it was good enough for a public appeal, and they thought to themselves, what better way to reach out for the public's help than to contact Crimewatch, because everyone, like I said, we only had 5 channels, much simpler time back in the 90s, and everyone would sit down every Thursday to watch this programme. So they hoped that the right person was sitting down that night with a cup of tea in hand and would call that tip line with any information they could use. And they were right. The presenters handled it really, really sensitively because they kind of knew that these 2 boys that led him away on CCTV were probably involved in some way in this crime. They handled it really well. They said that these boys were wanted just for persons of interest because they believed that they were trying to help James and maybe something just went wrong. They weren't listed as suspects, and they were promised that they would be kept safe if anything happened. And this was quite clever because this was a very, very aggressive case. Like, everyone who knew about this in the public, rightly so, wanted this person hung, drawn and quartered for what they did to this baby. So I think there was a lot of fear about coming forward for a crime like this, and rightly so, because it's bloody horrific. Meanwhile, on that Thursday night, someone is watching. An anonymous someone is sitting at home, just chilling, having their cup of tea, having a biscuit, and they see two boys that they know, two boys from their town exactly, and they phone in to Crimewatch and say that these two boys were off school that day, they weren't attending their primary school, and that one of the boys actually had blue paint on the sleeve of his jacket, much like the blue paint that was found in the eyes of James Bulger. This anonymous woman, who has never been named, listed the boys as two locals named John Venables and Robert Thompson. They were both 10 years old. Robert Thompson was born on August 23rd, 1982. Robert, how can I say this in a nice way? He never had a chance, guys. Like, as a child, I'm not saying as an adult, but as a child, he never had a chance. He was raised in a very, very violent and sexually violent home. His mum, Anne, was subject to violent attacks from his dad, who would get drunk and beat and rape his mother in front of the children. He was also subject to sexual assaults from his father himself and violent outbursts when his dad had been drinking. Several of the children were. There were 7 children in that household, and all the boys were subject to beatings or sexual attacks from their dad at one time or another. When their dad finally, did what he should have been doing a long time ago and left the family, you would think that this would be the end of their trauma, but sadly it wasn't. You see, his mother, Anne Thompson, couldn't handle the monsters that she and her husband's horrific relationship had created, because Robert was a bully, he was nasty, he was manipulative, he was cold, he was unfeeling. His other brothers, one was an arsonist and would just set fire to everything he could get his hands on. One was a thief who would just steal pretty much everything he could get his hands on. And then you had another one who was a sexual assaulter himself, and would often sexually assault the other brothers, including Robert Thompson. So Robert was subject to all these brutal attacks from his dad, from his brother, and then his mum. She couldn't handle that all these kids had turned out this way, so she started drinking heavily and then ended up beating the children herself as well. So this kid was getting violence at all angles, and then it was said that when he went to school, he would take it out on other children and be so aggressive. He was known as a playground bully. He would batter other children. He wouldn't have any remorse after he would attack these defenseless kids in the playground, and everyone said there was something just quite not right about him. Several neighbours said that they knew he actually would go out to the old train tracks and tie rabbits to the track, live rabbits, and watch them get hit by the train. He was also said to have a kind of pellet gun or like a BB gun, and he would shoot pigeons with that until they would die. So yeah, red flags all around for this one. And then we have John Venables. Now John Venables, his childhood wasn't actually as horrific as Robert Thompson's, but there's still quite a lot of question marks about his childhood, so we don't quite know how horrific his was. It could have been much worse. But his mum and dad, Susan and Neil, actually seemed to have a semi-functional marriage until sadly his brother and sister came along, and they both had severe special needs. The couple allegedly couldn't handle this and they fought constantly over the children. It was said that Neil would leave the family for months on end, then come back, then leave and come back, and in the meantime, when he was gone, Susan would have a parade of gentlemen suitors just coming in and out of the house. She was known as being quite a loose lady. Now, there was also a lot of neighbourhood gossip as to what these kind of men could be coming in the house for, and as to whether John would be sexually assaulted by any of these strangers, but that's never been proven, and I don't quite know about that, because later on in life it would suggest he's been sexually assaulted, but we'll just see. We'll see about that later. John himself, as a wee boy, was seen to be quite uncontrollable. His mum couldn't handle him at all, and he was constantly going to different youth groups, different schools, trying to find somewhere that would take him in because of his violent and aggressive behaviour. They finally did find a match made in hell for him when he went to St Mary's Primary School in Walton. This is where he would meet Robert Thompson, and shockingly enough, the two sociopaths became fast friends. They were loving it. They would terrorise other children in the playground, they would shoot pigeons together, they would kill rabbits together. Lovely. The The boys would often play truant from school, they would rarely attend school. They had a trick where they would don their full school uniform and then like ditch their backpacks in a local bush, and then they would just pick them up on the way back from school and then head home as if they'd attended school. Now, I don't really know what was happening. Did their school not phone the home? Did no one care that these kids weren't turning up to school? Clearly not, because even if the schools did phone, I can imagine that in both households things would have been so tumultuous that no one would have even cared if the kids attended school or not. As long as they were coming home at the end of the day, that was a win. So Friday the 12th of February 1993 comes around, and this day is no different for the two boys. They leave their houses in their full school uniforms as if they're heading off to school, ditch their backpacks and decide that they're going to have a day off. However, this day off is going to be extra special because they've had a chat and they've decided that they are going to steal a child. And not just any child, they're going to steal a toddler to torture. And they head to the Strand shopping centre in Bootle to pick out their victim. When the boys get to the shopping centre, they start stealing like random bits and pieces. So they start stealing things like troll dolls because, you know, 90s, why not? Go for it. And things like paint cans, like a little pack of batteries, and just sweets and just daft things that kids inevitably will shoplift. Not that I ever shoplifted. I was far too terrified. The guy at the local shop at my primary school would have cut your hand off. So no thank you. People at the shopping centre aren't blind. They see these two boys kind of, you know, stealing things under their arm and stealing things under their jackets, and they just pass it off as schoolboy fun. They have no idea that those two boys are in that centre hunting for a victim. At 3:15 p.m. that day, another woman is in TJ Hughes' shop with her children. She's just kind of having a wee browse, and her 3-year-old daughter and her 2-year-old son are just playing nearby. She does take her eye off them for one moment, and when she turns around, they are gone. She flies into a panic, shouting her kids' names, wondering where they could have gone, and when she turns the corner and finds her two kids, she can see that the little girl's standing back, but the wee boy, the 2-year-old little boy, is speaking with John Venables and Robert Thompson. When she approaches the two boys and asks them what they're up to or what the problem is, they actually start mumbling awkwardly, and then John kind of looks at the floor, stumbles his words, and walks away quickly. The woman did find the incident odd, and it was very clear that they were trying to lure her children away, but she doesn't do anything. She doesn't contact security, she doesn't tell any of the shop clerks, and she certainly does not phone the police. And this is something that she says is because you would never imagine a child would ever do something sinister like that, so she lets it go. The boys spend another 30 minutes in the mall, and they're just, to be fair, they're just being little shits. They're terrorising old people. It was said that they were literally going up to old ladies and like poking them in the bum until they would turn around and like smack them away, and they were just being all round absolute weirdos. But yet again, no one's calling anyone. There's these two children during school hours in their school uniforms in this big massive shopping centre, two 10-year-old little boys, and no one's thinking to call the police or ask where their mums are. Everyone says that they wondered these things, but they never quite asked, or they never got round to asking, or they were too busy to ask. In this case, will make you infuriated by the amount of bystanders who did absolutely nothing to jump in and stop this from happening. But at 3:42, the boys would eventually walk past the butcher's, where they say they saw James Bulger, 2-year-old baby James, standing in the doorway of the butcher's looking a little bit lost, as if he was going to have a little wander. John Venables then asked for the little boy's hand, and innocently enough he gave it up willingly, and he was then led out of the Strand shopping centre to a nearby main road. The boys later said that they had actually planned to throw the little boy into oncoming traffic. That was their goal of the whole day, to find a toddler, take him, and then chuck him in front of a bus or a truck or something, just, you know, normal kid stuff. And the boys decided when they left the shopping centre that they weren't kind of feeling that, so they actually took James underneath a bridge where there was a canal, like a dip, and they threw him down the ravine, so that wee James rolled down the ravine and actually banged his head. His head was bleeding profusely and he was crying. He started screaming for his mother, which I'm sure haunts Denise to this day, and I can't even imagine what she goes through on a daily basis. But little James began to scream so loudly that it kind of freaked John and Robert out, so much so that they then took a step back from James and were like, I don't know, who knows who he is, we are not with him. And several people actually noticed this because he was screaming so loud. A woman actually stopped, saw that the little boy was screaming and crying. She then saw the two boys and assumed that they must be playing with this little boy and it's all fine, and she just kept walking. The boys then picked James up and they're giving him like this weird carry. Like they're holding him, like one's holding him under the arms and the other one's holding him by the legs. So kind of like a Chuckle Brothers, to me, to you, to me, to you scenario. Very bizarre. But yet again, no one stops. No one asks any questions. They finally put James down when he stops crying, and he's kind of lagging behind a little bit because he's exhausted, he's beaten, he's tired, and he just wants to go back to his mum and dad. And it said that a couple of witnesses actually seen John kick the little boy to get him to move faster because he wasn't walking fast enough for them. And yet again, people saw this, they walked past, nothing was done. The boys at this point are walking like over a 2-mile walk. They are walking everywhere, all over Liverpool. So they get tired and they're sitting down for a little bit of a rest, and someone goes past and says that she saw little James laughing, so she never thought anything of it. I very much doubt that, but okay. And then the next thing was someone actually saw John yet again punch the little boy. So yet again he lashes out aggressively towards little James and he punches James in the ribs. At this point, the woman then decides to shut her curtains. It's not her problem and she doesn't want to get involved. You see, the 3 boys had actually sat outside on the step of the pavement outside her window, and she shut her curtains. She shut her curtains. I hope she burns in hell. I'm just saying it, I hope she burns in hell, and several other people, but we'll chat about them in a minute. Another older woman said that after this sighting had occurred with the woman closing her curtains because she's an arsehole, they then decided to take him in the direction of one of the police stations nearby, Walton Police Station. So they were walking this way and a woman actually stopped them because she could see that the little boy was bleeding. However, John had kept putting his hood up to kind of conceal the bleeding and the bruising on his face. But this woman saw it and saw that the little boy looked distressed and that he was asking for his mum. So she stops the 2 boys and asks them what's going on. And they said that they don't know, that they've just found James and they found him lying down the side of a ravine. And when the woman then questions them on this, they say that they're going to take him to the local police station just up the road. And then the woman watches the boys walk in the opposite direction of the police station and she does nothing about it. She just waves them on by. Little bitch. This case will get you really, really angry. Like, really angry. Like, several times you'll just be, like, swearing at the screen, and I'm sorry about that. But yeah, that was just Liverpool in 1993 for you. Allegedly, everyone was just a horrible shit. Things do appear to be taking a turn for the better when the boys are stopped by another set of women. So a woman with a little dog and a woman with her small child actually stop the boys because they can see that this isn't a family member of theirs and that he's screaming and crying out for his mum. The mother, who's with her little daughter, stops the 2 boys and asks them where they're going, and they kind of start mumbling and making up stuff, and she just doesn't think this is right. She thinks it seems a little bit strange. She says to the boys, "Where did you find this little boy?" And one of them says that they found him at the Strand shopping centre, which you need to remember is miles away for this police station. There's several police stations in that vicinity they could have gone to. So when they say that they're going to the Walton police station, she then thinks it's very bizarre that they would have travelled all that way, and how would they know where they were going? They're 2 10-year-old kids. So she says that she wants to take the little baby and take him to the police station herself, but her daughter, who she's carrying at the time, who's also a toddler, is too tired. So she asked the woman who's there with the little dog, remember we mentioned her, the woman with the little dog, if she'll stay with her daughter while she takes the baby to the station, because she doesn't trust these 2 kids to get that done. The woman then says, and I quote, "No, my dog doesn't like kids and we need to get home." And she says no, and therefore the woman has no other choice but to direct the boys in the way of the police station, because her daughter can't walk with her. She can't carry both babies at the same time. And a lot of people say, yeah, but they could have carried the baby and she could have walked the boys to the station. We don't know what kids are capable of, and they could have just grabbed the wee boy and ran away. It was said by the two witnesses at this point, however, that John Venables was gripping on to James's hand as if he was not willing to let him go with a woman, and he was making up loads of excuses like, no, we'll get him home, we're okay, we know where we're going. He was getting really defensive, whereas Robert Thompson was said to have let go of the boy's hand straight away and was kind of pushing him forward as if, you take him, I don't want anything to do with this. After the boys head off in seemingly the direction of the police station, the boys actually then jump into two other shops. They go into a pet shop where they're seen as acting really odd, and then they also head into a sweet shop and they attract attention again. So it's almost as if this was a massive cry for help. How could no one stop this from happening? There was so many people involved in this, and we will talk about those people in a wee bit later, but literally so many people witnessed this happening and literally stood by and did sweep all like nothing. They did absolutely nothing, and it makes me so angry. So I can't even imagine how the Bulgers feel as parents. They must be absolutely disgusted with the public in their area. After the boys left the pet shop and the sweet shop, they then decided to take little James over to the local railway station and end his life. At this point, it was quite obvious the boys had no intention of taking James to the police station because the railway line was directly across the road from the police station the boys had been heading to that whole time. The boys then started throwing rocks at James until he fell over, and one of them actually says in a police interview he just kept getting back up again, so we had to keep hitting him so he would stay down. Monsters. They then held James down and poured paint in his eyes, which is why there was blue paint found on one of the boys' jacket sleeves and one of the boys' shoes. They also began kicking and beating the little 2-year-old boy until he fell unconscious, and then it's believed that either both or one of the boys sexually assaulted James as well. Once they were done torturing him and beating him, they then decided to throw a big metal kind of subway plate thing on the railway track over his head, and it crushed his skull in several pieces. This was the devastating blow that police believe actually killed James Bulger. They then left his tiny, broken and beaten body lying across the railway track in the hope that a train would hit James and that police would think this was an accidental death, which it almost was, but thankfully his family and police had an autopsy done. The boys then decided to hang out in the street at a friend's house nearby, and then they would go to a local video shop. We're talking about Blockbuster, we're talking about Global Video. It was a big thing back then. You used to go pay money for a video or DVD in your young people's age, and then you would take it home, watch it for a couple of nights and then take it back. That's how we did things in the 90s. It was a simpler time. The boys then both went back to their normal lives and essentially pretended that nothing happened and they weren't involved in this at all. After the Crimewatch video aired on UK TV, the boys were pulled in for interviews, and they weren't really main suspects at first because this was just a tip, this was just a hunch, and yes, both boys had been off school that day, but there was no evidence that those boys had been in the Strand, and they didn't know this, of course, at this time. So when they pulled both boys into the interviews, they were more likely just trying to kind of rule them out. Also, these boys were a lot younger than what witnesses said they were. They thought they were about kind of 13, 14, 15, but these were two 10-year-old children. So police thought they would get them in, have the chat and exonerate them quickly. How wrong they were, because the minute they got those boys in and started asking questions, they started mixing up their stories, and eventually John Venables would admit that both boys had dogged school and missed school that day to go to the Strand. They both kind of had conflicting stories. However, Robert said that it was all John's idea and that John wanted to abduct a child for hurting a child, and that he had kind of just been there the whole way and never really wanted to get involved. And John was pretty much saying similar to Robert. He was saying that he did go and take James by the hand, because obviously that was on camera, he couldn't argue with that, but he said that he led him by the hand, but it wasn't him who kicked the toddler or punched the toddler like many of the witnesses said. And he also said over and over again that he didn't kill him. He was like, yeah, I grabbed him, but I didn't kill him. And he was very emotional whenever they would ask him about the violence towards the little boy. Now, when it came up about the sexual violence, both boys vehemently denied that this ever happened. But there you go, they're not going to admit that, are they? Really? Police detectives said that there was two completely different demeanours by both of the boys. Strangely enough, even though Robert Thompson was said to be kind of uninvolved from eyewitnesses, he was always standing either in front or away from the baby. He was never really the one holding on to the baby the way John was. When people would come up to them, John would be the one talking, saying it was his brother, or they were helping him find his parents, and he would always be the one gripping onto James as if he was not going to let go. And the weird thing is, police investigators said that Robert Thompson was the one who appeared very, very calm, very collected, very cold, very wise beyond his years, and very manipulative. They said that they felt like he was perhaps the ringleader and had the idea of going out and snatching the child, whereas John was very emotional, very childlike, would kind of rely on his mother in the interview quite a lot, and would sob incoherently when anyone would even ask him anything about the violence. And even his voice seems a lot more childlike on the interview tapes to Robert's. Robert seems very matter of fact and quite mature, probably of like an early kind of teen kind of age. And it's weird because witnesses say that it was John who was kicking him, John who was punching him, John who was leading him, and John who was adamant that he was going to stay with those boys. So I guess you just don't know. Maybe it was all show for the police. Maybe Robert was just in shock. I mean, he's seen so much abuse and neglect in his little life. So perhaps it wasn't really that shocking to him watching someone do that to a little baby. After confessing to being involved with the murder through some way or another, both of the boys were actually charged with murder, and these were the youngest children to have ever been charged with murder for over 250 years in the UK. So this was big news. It was everyone's worst nightmare. You would never think that you need to watch out for other kids killing your kids. This is why they got away with it for those couple of days, and why probably when Denise went out of the shop and she was looking for James, she could have possibly overlooked the kids, because who would look for kids snatching your toddler from your hand? Despite the fact the kids were so young, public disgust didn't really change when this came out about the children's age. They were still infuriated, and everyone wanted these kids dead. Like, they wanted their necks on the line. So many people were saying they wanted an eye for an eye. There was so many public opinions about how these boys should be punished as adults instead of children. And sadly, it just kind of goes to show how shitty their upbringings were, because neither of their mothers attended the trials. Even though John Venable's mother was sitting at home, probably drinking, saying that she was absolutely disgraced that the public were judging her son like this, and that she knows he could never have been involved, and he's just a nice boy who likes to be liked, and was just led astray by Robert Thompson, which I don't believe for 1 second. I don't believe that on either sides. Both of the boys were found to have James Bulger's blood on their shoes and on the sleeve of their jackets, and on the lapel of their jackets they had the blue paint. So both boys were definitely involved in the beating and killing of James Bulger. Whoever did the sexual assault, who knows? We still don't know to this day. That's a part of the crime that they both absolutely denied. Denise Bulger, James's mum, was actually heavily pregnant at the time of the trial, so she didn't attend the trial. It was actually said that she never heard about the details of the sexual assault and the beatings until years later, because it had been shielded from her by Ralph. Ralph said after the birth of their child, sadly, their marriage did break down, and I believe they got divorced in 1995, where Denise then went on to remarry and have 2 other sons. She had 3 sons in total, and then Ralph went on to remarry another woman and then had 3 daughters. So she had 3 sons and he had 3 daughters, and the 2 continued to fight for justice for James, because when the DNA evidence proved to the jury that the boys were guilty of murdering and abducting abducting James and also guilty of the attempted abduction of the little boy earlier that day, the wee boy that he took from TJ Hughes. The judge sentenced them to a minimum of 10 years to serve. So this was a fairly long sentence for such young children, but at this point the boys were only 10 and 11, so the public outrage in this case was clear. They wanted those kids to be behind bars and serve time in an adult prison, and that wasn't going to happen. The public were extremely angry at this sentence, and they were only further angered when later down the line an appeal actually led to the boys receiving a shorter sentence so that they would only serve around kind of 7 or 8 years in a juvenile detention centre. Both boys were sentenced so that they would be released upon turning 18 years of age. Denise was heartbroken and angry, and she fought constantly to have their sentence extended so that they would serve more time in prison because of the violent and sexual nature of the crime. She feared that they would reoffend, and this is something that she still to this day, she fights for her son and fights for the boys to lose all anonymity. The boys were so young when they committed the crime that the courts actually granted them their anonymity and a new name and identity so that when they left their juvenile detention centres and finished their sentence, they could go out into the public world and have a normal life. Because that's fair, because James got that, didn't he? No. But they were granted this. So when both boys were released from prison at the age of 18, they left, they got new names, new faces, and no one knew who they were, except for John. Now, this is where it gets kind of iffy, because when Robert left his juvenile detention centre and served his sentence, he left and it is said that he has not reoffended. As of 2010, it was said that he was in a long-term relationship with a man who knew about his past and knew of his true identity, and his identity has remained hidden from the UK and the world public. But John Venables, he's just a piece of shit, because when he got out, he quickly decided that he wanted to reoffend, because he had said ultimately when he was in prison he knew he had an issue and he needed treatment for his issues, and they weren't given that. It was the 90s, mental health wasn't as poignant as what it is now, it wasn't as well kind of expressed as it is now, it was still very taboo, especially in young men, and they were both just sent away and kind of given an education. Don't get me wrong, they were given a good education, but the boys were not treated for the cause of this crime and why they ultimately committed this crime. So all these unnatural urges and desires to murder this child were never really looked into or addressed for the boys. So when John was released, he went on to seemingly have a normal life for a little while. He met a young woman and they had a little girl, and one would think this is when he kind of would choose to turn his life around, but that never happened. There was kind of warning signs that John was going to go down a different path from Robert, because it was said at the age of 17 in the Red Bank secure unit that he was staying in as part of his sentence, he actually started having a very strange affair with one of the women who worked in the secure unit and who was there to essentially watch over him. And this was a really strange relationship, and many people said that he was very sexually manipulative and very kind of manipulative over women, and this is something he used to his advantage, clearly. Upon leaving the unit as well, he had a string of very, very young girlfriends. When he got into his late 20s, he was dating girls that were like 16, 17, and people thought that he was maybe just having like a second adolescence because he'd missed out on this massive chunk of being a teenager. Maybe he wasn't quite sure of what kind of age appropriate was. But this seemed to be a pattern, especially when it was found that John Venables had over 57 indecent images of child rape and child pornography found on his computer and on his possession. This is something he'd been collecting back in 2010 for well over a year. He was then released in 2013. He then reoffended, surprise, surprise, in 2017 and was placed back in prison for 40 months, and this was never actually released as to why he was arrested and what crime he committed, and James's mum and dad have tried to figure out what this crime was, and the fact that this man has been constantly given new identities and put back into the public. He's reoffending. Like, he's clearly not learned anything for the prison system or the young offender system. He is reoffending constantly, and I would guarantee you it was him. It was him that did the sexual assault. I would guarantee it. I would bet everything on it, because Robert Thompson, even though, yes, absolutely evil, God knows what he's up to. He could be up to stuff and just not getting caught, we don't know. But he's never reoffended, allegedly. So, do we believe that it was all Robert Thompson? He was the ringleader, he killed him, he did the sexual assault? I just don't buy it. And not only that, the kicking and the punching that the stand-by saw, I think it was John Venables, man. I think he was the ringleader, and he seems so manipulative. Now when you listen to his interview tapes and he's crying and being like, oh, I didn't kill him, he changes so quickly. When he's criticised or accused, he just gets his back up and he changes so fast. I mean, if history repeating is enough evidence, he's gonna do this again. John Venables could live next door to any one of us. He could be your next door neighbour. The last point I'm going to make on this case is about the 38 eyewitness testimonies that were logged after James was snatched from the Strand to when he was found on the railway track, brutally murdered. These 38 people were actually named and shamed in local Liverpool newspapers, and they were given the nickname the Liverpool 38. Now these people need to live with what they did, what they saw, and they need to live with that every day. And I really hope that that's punishment enough, because any one of those 38 people, if they had just gone a little bit extra, just bothered a little bit more, that wee boy could have still been alive to this day. We just will never know, because he was snatched at the age of 2 by John Venables and Robert Thompson, the infamous 10-year-old killers. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning into this week's case. I know it was an absolute brutal one, and all of these cases are brutal, don't get me wrong, but just when it involves children, it's heartbreaking, especially when children are the perpetrators as well. Like, how could you even imagine your child doing something that horrific at the age of 10? Like, it's so young. It's honestly so heartbreaking. But I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Please do hit that subscribe button if you enjoy anything to do with true crime, conspiracy theory, supernatural, all that good stuff in between. I would also really appreciate it if you'd go over to my personal vlog channel. The link for that is in the description box below, and you can follow everything I do in my day-to-day life, whether it's eating cheeseburgers, going to graveyards, trying to walk up a hill because I'm really unfit right now. You can see all that over on YouTube. You can also see me plan my wedding, which is a big battle of fun right now. Also, if you're missing your little Megan True Crime fix, you can feel free to follow me. Not home, because that's a no-no. It's a no-no-no, okay? On Instagram, at Megan True Crime. I also have a TikTok, which I kind of post on, at megan.truecrime. Thank you so much again for all of you guys who tune into my videos every single week. I love you, I love you, I love you. No, I really do. Seriously, like, you make my day better. When yous are nice to me, it's really, really nice. There's some people who leave a wee bit creepy comments on my page, but that's okay too. I just delete them. It's fine, honey. You do you. Rather you say it to me than to some child out in the street, okay? But yeah, no, in all seriousness, guys, thank you so much. Do hit that notification bell so you don't miss me. I'll see you next week on Friday for a little True Crime Friday. I've also got an amazing Weirdo Wednesday going to come up. I'm going to try and fit it in this week. I'm going to try and fit it in for you. I hope you all have an amazing weekend. Stay safe, lock your doors, don't talk to strangers. And if you see a battered and bruised 2-year-old lying on the side of the road, don't just assume he's okay, because he's probably not. See ya! Ooh, okay, bye.